the whole QTA for like teacher planning point of view when we were all working together is that we were sharper because we did the preliminary work before we were in front of our class. So we knew the major understanding. We decided on that before we started. We knew where we wanted discussion to lead them to the bigger idea of the story, you know, on day 2 and 3. So we were prepared.
It's not just going out there and saying, what do you think the author wants us to know? But do you find that figuring out the major understanding as opposed to the theme, they're both important, but do you think that's helpful for teachers in terms of planning? That then translated into achievement?
Probably something I still need to work on.
Me too.
It's coming,
yeah.
but
It's the
yeah.
hard part.
Well, and
Because
it gives you direction too.
the theme is more overall, and there can be a major understanding in several different components.
But I just remember when you were saying about the major understanding is not the theme and how teachers, and I'm guilty of that, how we would go off on the theme and, you know, we would try to get them to understand that theme, and it's like we've lost the text.
And if you don't know that, see, I think teachers, we make these big jumps. We get the major understanding almost automatically, intuitively, right? When we read Because of Winn-Dixie or Bud Not Buddy or whatever, we know what's happening in the dang story and what the author wants us to know. So we go right to, what does it mean? What are they, you know what I mean? What are they trying to tell us about life? But I think if we try to have kids make that jump, and they haven't even got the dang major understanding, then really the theme becomes pretty abstract, and then I think that's where kids go awry because they start thinking about themselves, you know what I mean, how it relates to just them, and they forget about the text.
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, the hardest part of planning this is sitting down on Friday or whatever and thinking up your questions. I mean, I kind of liked it. I knew what I was going to be doing exactly what I was going to be doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? And the kids knew too, and they were just ready to go, and they were into it too, which I was surprised about because I'll be honest, when we first started talking about this, I was like, this is going to bore the crud out of kids, right?
I worried about it too. I'll be honest.
But once you figure it out and you stick to it, and you don't like deviate from it, and it becomes like time that you're not going to negotiate with other people, like, because I think that's a huge problem with teaching. Like sometimes random guests will come, or like random assemblies and stuff, and you're like, oh, okay, so I guess I'll go do that, and then you don't book it back in. But then, even if there was a random assembly,
Minutes lost.
Yeah, I would pick it back up and like kind of boot something else out of my schedule, because it was just something I had to stick to, and I felt like if I followed through with that schedule, then my kids got more out of it. Because it goes on with that miles on the page. Like, if you don't have it planned out, then you're not going to get to the read to, you're not going to get to the echo read and the partner read, and then the miles on the page won't work if the planning isn't there to begin with. Critical thinking questions towards the back, where we as a team would come up, like, with
Your
sub-questions?
Yeah. And they would have to do the summarization, and they would have to answer the sub-questions. So I knew, like, I want to guide my kids enough that when it came time to be a little bit more independent, or even in group work, that they wouldn't, like, flail and, you know, be frustrated by it. And so when you ask questions, later on as they're writing, they're like, oh, I remember answering this, and they kind of streamline what you're doing with the core program. You know what I mean? Like, you're going in a certain direction.
It gives it focus where I feel like Storytown before has just been like, we're using it, you're just like you said, going in 15 different directions, you know?
Different, yeah, so like, on this story I'm going this way, on this story I'm going that way. And now is it sort of more particular routines that you're doing for writing?
Oh, it's definitely predictable. And you can talk to them and they'll tell you, on this day, this is what we do. You know, because we talk to them openly about it. I'm like, today we're building background. You know, this is Monday, Tuesday I'm reading it to you, Wednesday we echo, Thursday you partner read with, you know, and this is what we're doing. You know?
Yeah, as I went on, I think one thing that really helped me is, initially what I had was just one sub-question up at a time, but then I started like connecting all the sub-questions underneath each other with the overarching theme question, and then I was able to take every story and go right back up to the theme and say, how does this relate relate to imagination? How does this relate
To the
Each
essential
story, you
question.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Going
each
back
essential,
to the-
each sub-question went back to the overarching essential question, which was like, the last one we did, I remember really doing with the kids before CRTs was like, how does imaginations help the world, or something like that, right? And every story was a different perspective, and it was like really different. If you didn't have that theme kind of right in front of you, even as a teacher, you kind of get lost in it, because then you had the
Right.
Heward Anderson story, and then you had the inventors, and then you had something else, and you're like, well, how does this, how do these all relate? Yeah, the artists.
Or maybe not even trying to put them together that much. I
Yeah.
kind of see where people would just do a story, a story, a
Yeah,
story.
but then as soon as I
And then
like put
there's
up the
no
sub-questions next to each other, and I saw it all underneath, I was like, oh.
Well, you guys talk a little bit more about why is it hard? What's hard about doing the QTA?
Coming up with decent questions.
It's predicting what they'll answer. That's
Mhm.
what I'm like, I wonder how the kid would ask this, because you would have to ask the question in a way that made sense to 9 and 10-year-olds, especially the ELL ones, because you want them to answer in a specific way almost, but then you have to kind of anticipate, like,
Yeah.
where the gaps in the
Where they'll
holes.
go wrong.
Yeah, and so that was really hard, because sometimes I'll start writing a question, I'm like, this makes complete sense. And then I'll ask it, and all the kids, even the Hines, all staring at each other. What? And it's like, no, forgetting that there are gaps and holes because they're 9 or they're 10, and because they don't have the background experience. Because I think I plugged the holes by doing that background filler on Monday.
Can I just say one thing that I really liked is that when you came in, it wasn't like you were assigning a ton of work for us to do. It was down and dirty and to the point and doable. And that's like so refreshing.
Rather than making
have
you
to
do my
manipulate
stuff.
things and play for 20 years before you
Right.
implement it. It was,
Thank you. That's the
that was
goal.
really,
you know.
that was so.
Wanted to make it real.
And
Yeah.
I think it lends itself to buy-in too, you know, if it's not too overwhelming.
Well, and I feel like I really focused my teaching, that morning more. And the fact that my student teacher could totally grab it
Pick it up
and
and
take
do
it
it,
too,
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's effective and it's not too crazy to implement.
And would you say efficient?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, when you're not reinventing the wheel every week, and you're getting automatic on routines, and kids are getting automatic on routines, that's a level of efficiency that then allows you to waste less time.
And have fewer behavior problems because they know exactly what's expected and they're like right on it.
And other aspects.
Well, we were saying, in our conversation, Shannon and I were talking about prompts. He was using it in math, it was, so talk about that.
Well, it's
Or
just,
to
those
anybody.
prompts, right, because I was saying that like kids can't pretend to read anymore, I guess. You know what I mean? It's like, of course, because like even in math, like when we're reading a story problem, like, all right, everybody's fingers on number 3.
Yeah.
And we're not going on and, let's
Voices
read
together.
that, voices
Yeah.
together, so
Yeah.
it carries over to all.
Other, yeah, I found the same
Yeah.
thing.
Do you have your higher readers track also?
Yes.
Everyone's tracked.
Yeah.
It's more of a management thing, don't you
Yeah.
think, in some ways? They probably don't need to use their finger, but if they're not using their finger, go ahead, you're
I was
ask.
gonna say, I have noticed, one of the reasons why I want my higher kids tracking is because then I know if that, because they will literally, they sometimes have a little bit of inflated self-esteem where they're like, I don't need to pay attention.
Yeah.
And they're looking around and they're not on the right page, but if their finger's on the word, I know that they're with us. When I get to the end of the sentence and I look around, you can tell. And you can immediately tell 80% of the kids in 2 seconds versus if their fingers aren't on the word, I have no idea if they're even on the right page.
Or the
Do they
planet.
track word for word then? You don't let them maybe some higher readers tracked on the side, or they track word for word?
At this point, because it's our first year doing it, word for word, we follow it.
It
Some
really
of the high
increased,
readers, like Isaac would kind of
Yeah,
sweep, but he was
yeah.
on the line and he was there,
It
yeah.
increased their accuracy a ton. Even when I was dibbling them and I was watching them, because they really do want to just read it like this and hold the booklet or just kind of track on the side. And to have them put their finger on the word, they'll see the words and I'll catch the word. And sometimes when I'm reading, I'll make mistakes and the kids will say, "You said house instead of home," and I'm
Exactly.
like, "Thanks, good
Constantly.
things, good. You
But
caught
at least
it."
I know where we are,
I planned
And even like my higher kids made a huge amount of growth this year too. Like it's really.
But for my kids, it was hard to keep them tracking really that.
And more than anybody, your kids
lot
need
of
to
work,
track.
cause you know, the ABB, you know, I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
The super,
So
like
that
the
was
low
hard,
ones
but-
in my class, really,
And
you
that's
have
what
to
I-
like be like a hawk in front of them. You're like, put your finger on the word. And then like,
Why though? Why? Why do you want them pointing?
I
Some people
I
would say, well,
tell
they're
them,
reading
like-
at a third grade level. That's going to inhibit their fluency.
I tell my kids, I'm like, I want you to make that connection between the way the word looks and the way it sounds and how you say it. And so when you look at the word, you can say the word. And if you don't know the word, you don't know which word it is, you won't be able to spell it, and it's going to help you with your spelling, it's going to help you with your reading. And the kids, you know, they buy into it. It's true. It's what
It is.
the whole point of it is that you can see it and you can say it. And instead of being like, I don't know
But
where
don't
it
you think
is.
in the beginning, the lower kids, they never had their eyes on the text. They really didn't.
No.
They
They're
had-
literally
They're
staring
looking
at
at
a
the
wall, they're
picture,
looking at the carpet.
They were
Or
not.
outside taking off his shoes, and you're like, take your finger on the word. Get your shoes on, you know, but it's
Leave your
one of
shoes
my
alone.
special ed
It's
kiddos
not-
where you're like,
it's-
you need to look at that word because you're
It's
gonna
not
need
above the
more
word, but you're
exposure.
under the word.
Right.
Then they try to do this, so you couldn't
right,
see
right,
them,
yeah.
and they do all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff. Lord,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Sit
what
up
they're doing.
straight. You
Yeah.
gotta sit up
That's
straight.
Isaac said, no.
Yeah, and that was another thing, is like at the beginning of the
Yeah.
year when we would do reading groups, they're literally like this.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like,
Yeah.
that's not reading. Look at me, copy me. Here we go. Finger on the word.
Sit up.
Sit up straight.
Yeah.
You know, and your hands aren't touching your face because they sit there like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know that's how you feel.
Yeah.
What really works well is having the fist
Oh,
out. with
thumbs
the
down?
My kids love that. That worked so well. I showed it to them once and they immediately picked that up. And I think they all wanted to have a thumb up.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to just have.
Yeah.
Thumbs, I used to say thumbs ready, but I changed it to, because then everybody was like this and it does nothing.
Mhm.
But so if you say thumbs down, and if I say, what's your favorite color? And when you know the answer, you put your thumb up. It's a way to, you know, that you don't have to do hands up, and it's a way to give think time.
Yeah.
You know, that's all. It's another little routine. What do you think that sort of approach to comprehension, why is that better than maybe what you've done in the past, or what do you think that it is about that questioning the author stuff that turns the ticket for comp? And I feel other people feel
It's
free
like
to jump
deeper
in.
level, I mean, you really dig in.
Even though you're so open, because it's like, what does the author want us to know? I mean, that's kind of like, woo, you know.
I think it's because you get more kids participating. That it's not just, I'm looking for that one right answer in my,
Right.
you know, regular comprehension question or traditional comprehension
Right.
question.
Did you feel like the participation went up on the comprehension
Especially
and
with
kids
the
answering?
ELL kids.
And also like referring back to the text and having them go back to the text, it
For evidence
increase
or
their
whatever?
levels of just participation when we're reading, like paying attention as we're reading. Because at the beginning, it's like you're reading to them and they're just looking around, and there's no connection to like, oh, the answer is going to be in the text. And then towards the end, they're like, oh, if I
Right.
listen, I'm looking,
as
I'll
opposed
find
to-
the
And
answer.
as opposed to like regular like search and find kind of questions,
Yeah.
which has been kind of in the past.
Yeah.
It's more, okay, tell me your answer, but you need to be able to support it from
The text.
the text. And I think that's why like our test scores went up too, because that's what they have to do in, you know, the
Even if you
language
make an
arts test.
inference and stuff, you have to go back and support it with the text.
Why the author is even writing it, why are we even doing this, what's the purpose of it? And then I think got them really interested into the story.
And then it carries over in your writing.
Absolutely. I
You
was gonna
become
say
the
that.
author, and what's your purpose
It made it
in this?
so
Yeah.
easy for me to be like, hey, well, today we
Who's
read a
your
story where
audience?
the author's purpose was to do this. Now in writing, we're gonna have the same author's purpose and you're turning into the author. So it really carried over, I think, to other areas and with comprehension. I mean, if they can write a story that has great plot.
If they can talk about it. and they can
Exactly,
write it.
when they read about it, then they understand it that much more.
Did you see, like, when you would say things like, so what is the author telling us so far?
Well, everybody wants to answer that kind of question.
See, even the sped,
Did you-
it
yeah.
generates
Yeah.
that.
Did you see more over time? You know, initially they probably looked at you like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, initially I had to model for them a lot what I was wanting, because they were flawless, but then they started to pick up on it.
And like what is the author trying to tell us, what does he want to
What do we
do?
look at,
Really
so
helped
far?
with inference for me. I was trying to think the other day, and I have one specific student, is my lowest student, and on the CRT with the inference questions, he was just like, yeah. And I was trying to think of like what it was that helped them, and I think maybe the QTA, and just like getting them, because inference is such kind of a scary,
Oh, yeah.
you know, because
Well,
it's
you
like
gotta
no
think
one's telling you, but
It's,
yeah.
you gotta cut across the text.
Exactly.
And pull what you know.
And so I think it just gave them the confidence of making inferences without anybody telling you anything.
How did you get them to narrow down? Like when you say, like, because you know this happens, you say, well, what has the author told us about the Antarctic? Antarctic, I can't say that. What has the author told us about that place? And you know, they'll say some stuff but you know what you're looking for kind of too, right? Because if you're planning your queries to hit that, to push that major understanding, there's certain things you want more than others, right? So how would you find them? So suppose a kid says you know, like nobody wants to go there. You know, so how would you narrow from those open-endeds down to get the info you want? To me, that's the hardest thing.
That is
Well, I think I heard you say this, but I'd say, okay, there's one point, but who can add to that? And you would just keep saying, who can add to that, who can add to that, until they, yes, now this is probably the most important thing we need to know, until you get to the kid who would get to the who would.
Okay.
So then you're not dismissing what anyone says,
Right,
you're
right,
just
you're just looking for
building on
more,
it.
give me more,
But
Yeah.
in fourth grade even said that, and then they said to the kids, well, let's see if we could find it in the text. Where did Ian get that?
Yeah.
Now let's just see,
Look and
that's
see
what
if
they
it says
said this morning, they
anything
said that
about
same thing.
no one wants
Yeah.
to go there.
Yeah,
That's what I, like, and for the kids who respond with something that ain't there,
you're not gonna go there.
gotta
Yeah.
find it. Teachers always have the feeling that they're doing comprehension work, because everybody knows it's the goal of reading. It's like, well, I like to focus on comprehension. But you know, I don't think in a lot of classrooms we're getting the miles on the page that kids need. Not the kind of miles on the page that these kids need to improve. I think teachers talk about books a lot, but it's them talking. And the kids aren't reading. And so then when you do text to self connection endlessly, and so, you know, the text is about, you know, I don't know, because of Winn-Dixie or something like that. And, you know, have you ever had a dog? What is your, well, you don't even have to have read the text for a kid to talk about that, so they can blather on, right? Some folks really chafe, some teachers really chafe at the idea of, well, we've read a lot of stuff about weather. You know, I want to do a novel. I want to do Super Fudge. It's cute. The kids like it. It's like, you know, I mean, I get that, but I gotta say that in my gut, I'm becoming more and more convinced that when you focus your instructional efforts on text that's related, that has some meat to it, doesn't have to all be expository. I'm not saying that, but I think you get more out of it than when it's this book here and that book there. And for these kids, you know, Super Fudge is, I don't think Super Fudge buys them much.
I think we saw a lot of that on our test scores from comprehension. I mean, you look at a grade-wise, us last year at our CRTs and comprehension was one of our hardest areas. And then this year you look at our comprehension scores and they're amazing. Yeah. So much better than we had last year.
So were the majority of the questions not think and search and write their questions? The majority were on my own and
First read on the main selection is, what is the author telling us about? What did we just learn in this on this page?
Okay.
They were able to participate. Go ahead, Walter.
It's more vague or open and gives more specific response, which sounds weird. But it's the way it works, because before they just wanted to regurgitate what they heard, and now they're saying why it's there. I mean, they're trying to say, well, I think the author wants us to, or the author's introducing the character, or the author's trying to set up the place of where the stories. I mean, they're really saying, why did the author put that on the page?
And there's some research that suggests that prosody, not necessarily the expression aspect of prosody, but intonation and phrasing and pitch, those things actually do translate into comprehension. If your voice is doing what it's supposed to do, it means
they know it's a question, where before they may have just monotonely read it. But I mean, they just heard the teacher read it with voice. They're hearing everyone else read it with voice, and their voice slips in. And
it's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
In order to, you have to trust that the author is going to get across what the author has to say. And
Trust the author to be able to get something across.
right, and if you want active engagement in the text, then they have to not have all this other information cluttering up.
And time, and taking time.
And it becomes an assumption,
Yeah.
because the text may or may not, might be good at background information, but it may not have anything to do with what the author's really trying to get across.
Sometimes, even something very simple, like at the beginning of the year when they're asked to write about a learning experience. Write about a time that you've learned something. You're like, what?
I've never learned anything.
Yeah.
And you're like, you've learned so much.
Yeah, I don't know
And they're like,
anything.
I don't know.
And so like,
People think that's an easy thing to write about, that everybody should just be able to do that, but
but they
But
care.
they
not
don't
necessarily.
recognize that, yeah.
And to think that they would go, like, to ask them a theme question, like, why do people, how does
Boost their
facing
imagination.
adversity help change your life or something, They're like, wow, I don't know.
I don't even know what adversity is.
Yeah, I've never even read a story about this. And it's like,
They're like,
you
you
have
read
it all
12.
there. If you have it all there, I think they feel a lot more confident how to attack things.
But to be honest, what I was most pleased with was not only this, I was most pleased with the change in what they were writing about the text.
nice.
So when you ask questions, later on as they're writing, they're like, oh, I remember answering this. And they kind of guide each other back to the right place.
Well, your kids got, like, amazing at that writing piece by the end. I was so impressed with it.
Well, and that's what the new
They
core is
could
gonna
write for
ask
like
us
an
to do.
hour
Yeah.
and just be silent for an hour and just write and.
But which would have taken them 2 hours, it would have been not as good
Would have been
at the start of the year,
junky.
yeah. So, I mean, I think she was the one struggling, putting together that writing piece all the way from the start. And I think I know I started later than her, but my kids have become better writers, and I can't wait to do it next year.
They like to hit the ground running, where, and now whatever that is, hot, cold, summer.
cold.
Boom, here we go, let's work on summarization, and then answering that sub-question.
It's
The
huge.
growth is huge.
Well, and we all knew it too, going in this year, we're like, this is gonna be a struggle, and
Yeah.
I was,
This was a low.
Were you guys, was this a low group? You
Yes.
noticed kind of a
Yes.
low
Oh,
group
gosh.
in general?
Since
For sure.
the beginning, it's been a low group.
Oh, since they came in
Yeah.
first grade,
Kindergarten,
kindergarten.
and like, when I got my scores back this year, I was just totally like, oh,
So
wow.
go ahead and talk about yours, Shannon, what you
Well, I mean,
saw,
my-
what kind of growth you saw.
Huge, and I'll tell you, I was gonna talk about my RL, I really like RLA, I think that's the RLAs, I think it's like a really good measure.
Yeah.
And I will never forget, like, so I did the start one, the start of the school year, RLA to everybody. And then in December when I did it, I was seeing like 3 and 4 levels of jump, and I was just like, oh my God, this is crazy, right? So, and then when I got my scores back, I'm not gonna lie, I was shocked. I was like, oh wow, I can't believe
Yeah.
these kids did as well as they did. I was really, really shocked, because I'm like my worst critic.
Being able to read fast is really important. Being able to understand what you read is really important. And it all works in tandem. And if you forget one part, and then some things, that's what the gaps and holes come.
I agree. One thought, here's what I think are the 3 pieces that are really needed for low kids. 1, something like this that hits the main selection. Right, the core program, the grade level text, something that hits it hard, miles on the page. Another thing that's super, and that, I think, that's where you're seeing this DAYS stuff and some of the CRT stuff. The other thing I think they need is, so you get a big hit in comp there, and some hit in fluency. But I think to get more fluency, they need the kids that are just below grade level need work and support texts. Okay, so small group stuff, small group work and support text or related text. Third, the kids who are quite a bit lower, a year or more, you know, 2 years below grade level, they still need what I would call a bona fide Tier 2 intervention that hits phonics, spelling, text at their instructional level. I'll allow next steps or higher steps or early steps. Doesn't have to be my stuff, but they need a real intervention that also hits the word study. Because what I'm seeing in some of the RLA scores out of here from like 4th grade is some of the RLAs aren't getting the bump they normally would get. And I'm thinking, why? And here's what I'm thinking. I think they need a real shot of some Tier 2 intervention as well to get the fluency. Not to take away from any of this, but I think how do you build fluency? I think it's also the word study at their level. So just remember that, you know, when you guys are trying to figure out as a school, what do you do, what do you cut, right? This is a typical school response would be, oh, let's not do the early steps, next steps and stuff anymore. We don't need that. Now we've got this. That would be a classic educational response. We throw the baby out with the bathwater and we bang back and forth between these extremes.
And so I've been in some other really good programs before, but it's because they have similarities to this one. In that there was ongoing, throughout the year, repeated chances to ask questions, to be observed, to be informed, that wasn't quite the way it was intended, or that's right on. And because you can go to the best training in the world, go back to your classroom, and do what you think you were supposed to have done, and it's not it. And so, and sometimes 2-3 months down the road, you've modified it simply because it's what you thought was best, but you didn't even realize you were changing. But coming back, ongoing feedback, and there are modifications that we made as we went along, but it was group decided on, a group agreed that.
Nice is that it was a safe environment. When people came in to observe, there was none of this. You did this right. You know, like, you know, in these schools we're just like, but this was, this
You
felt,
guys get yelled
it
at.
felt, it felt different. I felt really supported and encouraged. I think more than ever, these kids have a love of reading. And they will share books with each other, where other classes, you know, there'd be 1 or 2 maybe, but these kids, oh, I read this book, you try this one. And it was like, wow, you know, I mean, and they were low level, but still, for them to get into that doing like,
reading habits.
reading for fun.
I feel like I'm saying
That's amazing.
Which is
better
huge.
Students. Does
That
that make
is
sense?
really
I feel like I've trained, like they are students
Yep.
now, right?
You
Instead
know
of a bunch
what,
of
that's what
chuckleheads.
this is saying. I mean, that's what this is saying, Shannon. This stuff shows lovely transfer.
We really, at the beginning of the year, we talked a lot about if we work on comprehension, then we could really help our kids with story problems because they can't comprehend the story problem, let alone solve the story problem. And I was able to see a lot of growth in my kids. I was really nervous about math because I wasn't sure if there was
Transfer.
It was the things that we got to see even in math was fantastic.
I lost sleep.
And their endurance was sticking to it.
Do you think all those miles on the page builds endurance for things like the CRT?
I mean, that's what I was gonna say, is like, according to that article that you had us read, even 6 minutes a day made a huge difference in their outcomes at the end of the study. And thinking about, like, just my last, 13 years. There's kind of a lot of wasted time of, asking unneeded questions, whatever it is.
For me, because I like to yak, as you know.
Absolutely, it's my stage up there.
Right.
I'll say, like, my kids spend the first 2 hours of the day taking apart books.
Yes.
Every day.
Yep.
You know? And I think it really shows.
It shows.
This has transferred to the standardized tests, so the transfer to other texts.
Right.
So.
For my kids, getting away from just the literal is very difficult, but also I was sharing, very exciting for some of them who really need that stimulation, in special ed, it's like, yeah, you're way behind, but intellectually they can auditorially, they can pick up a lot of information. And this just gave access to them that opened up a new world.
To what, the text?
The text and just new information and ideas that were out there that were at a higher level than what the intervention stuff gave.
And weren't your kids excited to be, like, reading fourth
Stephen
grade text?
Stephen was so, I mean, I was just telling me, he was like, I love
Couldn't wait
this,
to
I
come and
love
do it.
this, he just
That's-
couldn't wait to do it.
Really?
Love these stories, I mean, really, I mean, it was like, wow.
If you watch the level of engagement of her students in the strategic reader versus the main selection, the strategic reader is just kind of a shallow reading.
Right,
There's no real meat to it.
because it's such controlled vocabulary.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same vocabulary, but yeah, it's a simpler story. But when they would read that main selection, they were like attentive, sitting up, paying attention. They were thrilled, excited. I mean, these are struggling readers that are excited to read. They're ready. They're in their seats, ready to go. They want to read it.